Hi, my name is George Santiago. I am the Executive Director of Secondary Schools. You're probably wondering why I am here talking to you today about elementary and why am I here talking to you about reading. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you who know me, I was born and raised in Fontana. I attended Redwood Elementary, then Secret1 Middle School, and I graduated from Fontana High School back in 1986. So my heart has always been in Fontana. As such, when I became a teacher, my first stop was Redwood Elementary, where I taught for 6 years before moving over to Juniper Elementary, where I was an assistant principal from 2003 to 2005. In 2005, I had probably as much fun as I had at Secret1 Middle School the last part of the last 7 years or so. I never had so much fun. I had 5 amazing years at Oleander Elementary, and I want to kind of tell you the Oleander story. When I arrived at Oleander, I must confess, I was petrified. I had heard horror stories when I was a teacher at Redwood about Oleander. It was in a very, very tough neighborhood. The school was surrounded by apartments, had the highest crime rate in the city of Fontana. So as you can imagine, I was going to a school where there was a lot of crime and there was a lot of poverty. When I arrived, our transiency rate was through the roof. We would have students who would leave in August because at that time we were a multi-track school, and they would come back in the spring. At one point, and this is prior to I arriving, I believe they had calculated the transiency rate at over 100%. So when I arrived at Oleander Elementary School, and I really want to make sure I emphasize this, it wasn't just me, but it was the staff, the students, the parents, everyone working together to improve the academic outcome of that school. We had some challenges. My first month there, and actually before I arrived, I met with the teachers, and I saw a group of dedicated teachers who really were invested into the students. These were teachers who had the opportunity to move other schools. At that time, there was a new elementary school. They had the opportunity to move to that new elementary school, but they chose to stay at Oleander because they believed in the kids and they believed in the community and they believed they could make a difference. Using that information and using that passion, when I arrived, my focus was simply on creating a culture. There were actually two things I wanted to do. The first thing was I believed we had to build student relationships. That is first and foremost the most important thing we had to do. And then the second thing we had to do was to create a culture of reading. Before I talk about the culture of reading, let me just spend a quick minute on the student relationship. You know, you've heard this a lot, you're going to hear this a lot, but students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so I believe that in order for us to move that school forward, we had to show kids we cared about them. As you heard me say earlier, we had a really high transiency rate. So we had to do something about that. The only way we were going to keep the kids there was to show that we really, truly cared about our students. And I really talked to the staff about making sure everyone understood that their students weren't just the 20 kids in their class, but their students were all 950 to 1,000 students that were on that campus. That though they were maybe responsible for 20, anytime they saw a student on campus, it was an opportunity for them to engage that student. Because again, when our students walked through our doors, especially at Oleander, we never knew what they may have had or have gone through that night. So I really challenged the staff that whenever they saw a student, to engage them in a conversation. Say, hey, good morning, how are you doing? And that was really, really big. The second thing we started doing was building that culture of reading. And that was significant. Though we came to a school that was already using AR, we had to really increase the use of AR, accelerated reading. So a couple of things we did to introduce that was we created the accelerated reading store. A lot of people, a lot of staff did not feel that was right. They felt we shouldn't be using a prize to encourage something that would be a lifelong skill. And again, in talking to the staff, I said, and I agreed with them, I think reading can become something that's intrinsic, but at the beginning we had to give them that extrinsic reward. And sure enough, we, working with the PTA, we bought prizes, we bought just, you name it, to make that AR store something that the kids really wanted to do. We created a redemption center where, depending on how many words they read, they would be able to purchase prizes. My belief was that as the students learned to develop reading, then the accelerated reading store would begin to kind of fall away. And sure enough, it did. By the third year, kids weren't even caring about the store. They wanted to read. And we built some other things into that program. For instance, one of the things we did, it was every class it became a class competition, a school-wide competition. So if you were in a first grade class, you wanted to have the most words read. If you were in a second place, if you were second grade, you wanted to have the most read. And so one of the things we started doing was in our cafeteria, and every year we had a different theme, but one year in our cafeteria, we painted a football film. And what we did is we put some helmets, and and for every 10,000 words or whatever, I can't remember what it was, the class would move forward. And as soon as the class would score a touchdown, then they were rewarded with the pizza party. That was probably the most extrinsic thing we did. But what was even better than that was towards that third year, we decided to make a shift in our recesses. We shifted from having where students went and ate first, we shifted to where students actually played, and then they played for like 15 minutes, I don't remember the exact amount, and then they went to the cafeteria, ate, and then went to class. The thought was, by them eating first, it would help to calm them down. You know how when in elementary they come off that playground, they're on fire, they're just like, hey, this kind of shifted that. But what we were finding is that students were taking their books outside, and then when they were sitting in the cafeteria during that last 15 minutes, they were reading. And it became such a thing where the teachers were taking books to the cafeteria. And I can't tell you how neat it was to see some of my fifth graders with I'm trying to think of Harry Potter. They were reading Harry Potter books. I'm like, wow. And we had fifth graders reading at 8th grade level, and they were we couldn't get enough books. Every year I was using more and more of my categorical dollars to up the amount of books we had. And that was so important too, is if I wanted this to be a successful program, it was important for me to I had to support the program financially. So I made sure our librarian and our library had all the latest books that they could have. So I make sure we upped the books. But what was neat is what started happening to our school academically, because I felt reading was the foundation. Again, when we came in and when we arrived in 2005, Oleander was one of the lowest performing schools at that time. 5 years later, we became one of the first. And if you recall back then, the tool used to measure our achievement was the API. And at that time, I believe there was one school that was 800, and I believe that was Sierra Lakes. We actually became the second or third school to become an 800 school, and at one point we had the second highest academic performance index. And again, I kind of want to reiterate something I'm saying. Here we have an 800 school in a very, very difficult area of the city, where based on what we know about research, based on what we know about demographics, those students should have been struggling, but they weren't. They were excelling. And again, remember I talked about our transiency rate? We literally had parents who literally would drop their kids in the campus, because we were so close to the apartments, they would literally drop them over the wall because the students didn't want to come to the school. By the time we left, we had a waiting list of parents who wanted to go to Oleander. And I attribute it to the fact that we built those relationships. those kids knew that they were going to be loved and cared and respected for. And number two, we created a really dynamic reading program, and reading became such a focal point that, again, that became the tool that a lot of teachers used to begin to build relationships with. They would greet students and say, hey, Johnny, how many words have you read? Oh, I'm at blah, blah. Johnny, when I see you tomorrow, you come and see me and tell me how many words. And Johnny took that personal, and it became a really important part of that culture. Students knew, hey, any adult on this campus is going to ask me what word or how many words I've read, and if I'm not reading enough, then they would challenge me. And then I think teachers started to do other things. They created programs, incentives within their own classrooms. And at the end of the day, we just felt, because again, we also had a high EL population. I believe it was about 86%, 90% at that time. So there was a lot of factors we had to, but by building that foundation and reading, our students were able to overcome some of the challenges they were facing. And again, I think by the time we left, our API was 818. And again, it was based on that culture of reading and on that culture of creating a positive school culture.